Welcome to the Daily Exchange, guys. We're here and we're talking about Bitcoin and what exactly is Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is the world's most valuable digital currency. Bitcoin is a type of digital asset that's available to anyone, anywhere in the world. Recently, it's become so popular that the head of the US Treasury is talking about it in Congress. Traders on Wall Street are buying it, the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange is selling it, and even the President of the United States is tweeting about it. So it's time to pay attention. Bitcoin is often described as an electronic mishmash of cash and gold, potentially speculative gold. This is because Bitcoin can be used both as money to pay for things like you would with cash, or as a store of value to hold onto long term, just like gold. Unlike cash and gold though, Bitcoin is entirely digital, which means it is borderless and can be owned by anyone, anywhere in the world. It's also not controlled by anyone, so it can't be taken away from you the way, funds in a bank account can be frozen or seized. You can't call up the CEO of Bitcoin. Better yet, it has no weight or size, so it's just as easy to send to $100 worth of Bitcoin or $2 million worth of Bitcoin. And because it's digital, you can do a whole lot more with it than you would with cash or gold. In fact, some people like to call it smart money because it's programmable. And as you may have heard, Bitcoin can be quite valuable to some people. Today, I'm going to help you understand what Bitcoin is, how it works, explain why it's so valuable, and briefly show you where you can buy and trade it. Plus, I'll be dropping all sorts of fun trivia along the way. Stick around and we'll be right back after this. Now let's talk about the difference between Bitcoin and the blockchain. Now, this is important. The first thing to understand when talking about Bitcoin is that there are actually two things people might be referring to about what they use the word, Bitcoin. The first is the digital asset Bitcoin, also known as BTC. That's the code that's used in exchanges. When it comes to Bitcoin, BTC is also often referred to as a coin or a digital coin to be more precise. BTC are the digital coins that are used on the Bitcoin network. So when someone talks about the price of a single Bitcoin, this is what they are talking about. Bitcoins are gradually created over time, and there will never be any more than 21 million of them. The second thing Bitcoin refers to is the Bitcoin network. This is the blockchain that powers the entire Bitcoin network. The blockchain is the underlying technology that allows users to send and receive Bitcoin. The blockchain is what gives BTC its value, thanks to all its clever features and design. So when someone mentions BTC, they're almost always talking about the digital coin itself. While if they're talking about the Bitcoin network, then they're referring to the Bitcoin blockchain, which enables the transactions of Bitcoin to happen. Okay, so it's important to know the difference. Let's have one more look at that. Now, we've got a diagram here. This is a screenshot from a Finder guide about Bitcoin. As you can see, on the left is a description of the Bitcoin digital asset, whereas the network is on the right. As I mentioned before, the digital asset is often abbreviated to BTC and is usually referred to as a coin. These coins can be collected, traded, and spent like money. When someone talks about buying, selling, or trading Bitcoin, they're talking about these coins themselves. Now, unlike a regular coin though, you can divide BTC into tiny little fractions, which is called Satoshis. Now, one Satoshi is equal to 0.00000, so 7 zeros there, 1 BTC. There are 8 decimal places there. The smallest unit, which can be called a Satoshi, which is 100th of a millionth of a Bitcoin. In case you're wondering, that's a decimal with 7 zeros after it, or a 0.000000001. Satoshis are also known as sats, which is another name for it, which is where the popular investor phrase stacking sats comes from. So back to our guide. We've got this guide here again. Check it out. On the right is a brief description of the Bitcoin network, more commonly known as the Bitcoin blockchain. The Bitcoin blockchain is responsible for everything else that makes Bitcoin special, such as its security, speed, and all-around genius, in fact. The Bitcoin blockchain has two main jobs. It takes care of transactions. Anytime Bitcoin is sent, it is through this network, which is also connected to the internet. Its second job is to keep a record of every Bitcoin transaction ever made. In fact, it goes all the way back to the first ever transaction ever made, which is called the Genesis block. The record of transactions is known as the ledger and is publicly available to everyone. That means that anyone can verify a transaction and trust the Bitcoin blockchain, rather than having to trust a person that has sent a payment between people. You can actually just look it up. It's a public website that you can go to. Now, unlike almost all other networks, no one owns or is in charge of the Bitcoin blockchain. This means no one can stop, change, or alter transactions. It's a bit like BitTorrent. If you want to have a look at the rest of that guide yourself, which is a whole lot more info on Bitcoin, you can click on the link in the top right-hand corner or find another link in the description of the video below. It'll tell you all about it. Now, who is, the creator of Bitcoin? And this talks about, obviously, the Satoshi whitepaper. Knowing who created Bitcoin isn't actually that important. As I mentioned before, no one owns or controls the Bitcoin network. That's why the creator, or creators plural, should have chosen and remain anonymous. Bitcoin started as a technical white paper less than 10 pages long, which was published to a famous cypherpunk mailing list in 2008. Here's a picture of the white paper. It was called Bitcoin and a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, and was authored by the pseudonymous Satoshi Nakamoto. Interestingly, the only reference to the word Bitcoin is in the title and the official website. Nowhere in the text is the word Bitcoin used. The Bitcoin blockchain was then launched a few months later on January of 2009 by the anonymous author of the white paper, Satoshi Nakamoto. Because Satoshi Nakamoto is a pseudonym, which means it's not a real name, someone prominent, figures in the cryptocurrency industry have theorized that Satoshi might be a group of people rather than one individual. Regardless of who created Bitcoin, the most important thing is that Bitcoin stays leaderless, decentralized, and owned by no one, just like the creator intended. So how does Bitcoin work? And this is, to explain the blockchain. Okay, so now you know what is a Bitcoin and what makes it different to the network itself. But how does it actually come all together and work? Well, as you mentioned, blockchain is the actual technology that brings it all together. The Bitcoin network was first, the ever example of a blockchain as we know them today. It gets the name because blockchain, because it can be pictured just like a series of blocks of information that have been chained together with sequential order. Now, here's a picture of a chain. Blocks are packets of data such as transactions and messages which have been broadcast to the network. Blocks are kept in a sequential order. This ensures the blockchain keeps a complete and organized record of all transactions ever made on the Bitcoin network. In the case of Bitcoin blockchain, a new block is created roughly every 10 minutes. Blocks are created by specialized computers called miners. Now, a report by media outlet CoinDesk estimated that there were more than 2 million mining machines active in 2019. You're going to want to remember that number. Now, only one miner can add a block at a time, so that's one machine adding a block every 10 minutes. Now, this is where it gets very, very, very interesting. The information inside each block is checked for accuracy by comparing it with the information presented by every other miner. So if one miner tries to lie and change a few numbers so that their personal account becomes a lot richer, they will be unable to because it won't match up with anyone else's records. And remember, in 2019, that would be one miner's version of the truth versus more than 1 million saying otherwise, or even 2. So that makes Bitcoin a pretty tough nut to crack, right? This process of validating transactions through agreement is called consensus, and it is one of the fundamental cornerstones of the Bitcoin blockchain, and blockchains as a whole. Consensus is kind of like a classroom of students marking their work together after a field trip. As long as the majority of students have the same answer, then that is the one they will accept as the truth. In Bitcoin, consensus can be threatened by something known as a 51% attack. As the name suggests, a 51% attack hypothetically occurs when someone takes control of 51% of the network or the votes, so that they can write whatever they want into the blocks and have faith those blocks will pass consensus. So to be specific, a 51% attack occurs when a majority of the mining hash rate, so all the people checking the transactions, is used to attack the network by putting a fake transaction to the new blocks or altering old ones. Fortunately, this has never happened to Bitcoin, as the logistics of organizing one are nearly impossible, and doing so will devalue the network in the process, rendering the attack largely pointless. In other words, if you go and attack the network and change your number, you're actually going to kill the value of the coins that you steal. There's no point in robbing the bookstore if you burn down all the books in the process. Here is a miner as an example. It's a machine. As mentioned before, they are specialized machines, such as the one in this picture. They keep the Bitcoin network secure, as well as updating it with new transactions. Miners also act as nodes, which means they keep the full history of the Bitcoin ledger, which is available for anyone to see. Miners are located all over the world and contribute to the power of the Bitcoin network. This is known as the hash power. The hash power contributed to with each mining rig, similar to the way that the power, speed, and memory vary between different personal computers. And so because of that, it means some miners are more powerful than others. Now, while miners are machines, they are owned by real people, organizations, and businesses all around the world. That being said, miners are still independent, which means outside of their own company, they don't belong to any central authority, so no one tells them what to do. In fact, there is often a lot of disagreement between the miners. When miners disagree on the rules, code, or history of the blockchain, they are able to fork the chain and create a different idea that they believe in, and that is a different blockchain, forking off from a shared point in the transaction history. This has led to the creation of several new blockchains, such as Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV. If you'd like to know about the Bitcoin forks, check out the description below for some videos and guides on some of the most popular forks. Anyway, back to Bitcoin. Thanks to the distribution of the miners across the diverse geographical, cultural, and political landscapes, Bitcoin is said to be decentralized. Decentralization means that no single authority, node, or person has total control over the Bitcoin network. Because of this, Bitcoin is considered unhackable, since it would nearly be impossible to take over and control so many machines or people at once. So as you can see, miners play a big part in not just the day-to-day operation of Bitcoin, but also its security. And for doing all of this, miners are rewarded with Bitcoin itself for each block they successfully add to the blockchain. This is how new Bitcoin are created. The amount of Bitcoin that miners are paid is reduced by half every 4 years or so. So part of Bitcoin's algorithm is obviously designed to counter inflation. In 2019, the reward was 12.5 Bitcoin per block, with that number set to reduce by half in 2020 in the event known as the halvening. In a nutshell, miners secure the network and verify new transactions once every 10 minutes. For doing so, they're paid in Bitcoin, 12.5 currently, but that amount reduces every year. Let's talk about blockchain adoption and then technology. So one more thing before we move on from our discussion about blockchain. There are now hundreds of different blockchains in use in industries as diverse as mobile phone networks, health insurance, to even gaming. What I mean to say is that there is no one single blockchain. Blockchains are essentially networks, and thus anyone with the right tools and know-how can get one up and running. Much like a company might build an intranet for workplace communications, say, or mimicking the technology of the public internet. As for Bitcoin, it was the first ever blockchain built so that in a public way with a coin. So that's something of an industry standard that all other blockchains have adopted or improved upon to suit their own specific needs. It was kind of the first. There were other blockchains before that, but they weren't ever used as a cryptocurrency in the same way. So when we talk about the blockchain, we're just discussing the technology in general rather than a specific blockchain. Blockchains can be used in all sorts of coins. And in this case, Bitcoin uses a blockchain. So how does Bitcoin get its value? So now you know how it all works. Hopefully you are starting to see for yourself why something like Bitcoin can be so valuable. Not only can you not shut it down, and we've covered that, but Bitcoin maintains its value in 3 key ways. Number 1, it fills a need. 2, price speculation on the currency, and 3, the use of the network. So let's talk about the first one, filling a need. Thanks to the transition to a global digital economy, a digital asset can be sent anywhere in the world and used for payments in a totally secure fashion is, I guess, incredibly valuable. While we're able to move government-issued money like US dollars and British pounds electronically, it's not quite the same. Government-issued currencies, which are also known as fiat currencies, are not truly digital. They correspond to a physical unit which must be stored in a physical location. Only their representation of ownership can be moved digitally, not the actual unit of currency itself. Bitcoin, however, is purely digital, so it is transferred in its entirety when the transaction is made. The actual money itself moves. On top of that, Bitcoin is borderless. If you want to transfer your money from your bank account in New York to your auntie in London, you'll have to exchange in and out of currencies. This is typically quite costly, especially for small amounts. And what if you want to send money somewhere more exotic, say? There's a chance your bank won't even offer you the service, and you'll have to use an even more expensive provider. Bitcoin, however, is the same no matter where in the world you are. So it makes no difference where you send it, who you send it to, or how much you send. Plus, it's incredibly easy, especially if you compare it to taking out all the cash of your account and moving it physically into another. These days, a Bitcoin transaction can be made with as little as 2 things: an address and the amount you want to send. Then you can simply send it. The money is now completely and fully in someone else's account. No one else is in the middle. There's no middle person. You can even transfer millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin for a fraction of the price it would cost using a bank. The last thing I'll add is that it's completely public. This means that anyone can verify that the transaction has been made without having to rely on a third party. I'll let you think of why that might be useful. How does Bitcoin, I guess, get its value? Well, another reason is the price speculation. As Bitcoin has grown in use and price, so too has its popularity. One group that it's become particularly popular with is investors, day traders and speculators. Thanks to the volatility of the Bitcoin's price, which can change as much as 20% or more in a day, investors and traders who had previously traded markets like Forex, commodities, and stocks have rushed to capitalize on Bitcoin's price swings. Now, there are hundreds of cryptocurrency exchanges around the world satisfying the customer need to speculate on the price of Bitcoin, with some reporting volumes of several billion per day. Another reason Bitcoin drives price speculation besides volatility is because it is both a rare and finite asset. There is a fixed supply and is difficult to acquire. Only miners can create new Bitcoin, which makes it very difficult to get a hold of. And the Bitcoin algorithm is programmed so that the total amount of Bitcoin ever made will only be 21 million. With the last Bitcoin estimated to be mined around the year 2140. Then, when you factor in that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Bitcoin that are estimated to have been lost, that total supply actually becomes even less. Thanks to the halvening, which happens every 4 years, the supply of new Bitcoin is decreasing over time. So for some people, this creates a desirable asset as well as one to speculate on over the long term. A bit like gold and its finiteness and how it is only a small amount of it is produced every year. In fact, it is the rarity and limited supply that have caused many to liken Bitcoin to digital gold. Third reason of how it gets its value is the network usage. Bitcoin maintains its value is simply, another way I guess, is through the use of the network itself. Bitcoin has been attracting users since day one for various reasons. Maybe because it is verifiable, secure, public, decentralized, and trustless. You don't need to trust anyone else. Then there are plenty of economic theories that explain why network activity creates values, such as Metcalfe's law, which can be used to explain the value of the Bitcoin network. However, it's even simpler than that because the Bitcoin blockchain now requires massive amounts of electricity run. The miners who operate the network need to pay for their electricity bills. Because they are rewarded with Bitcoin for every block mined, they then have to sell the Bitcoin to recoup the money spent on electricity. So as the network continues to be used, it naturally feeds a price discovery mechanism, which continues to feed back and give Bitcoin value based on the principle of supply and demand. So, on top of those reasons, there's of course a whole bunch of other things that people like about Bitcoin. Some see it as even I guess an alternative to the global banking system. Some see it as a technical marvel. Others feel it's very political and a way to wrestle financial control out of the hands of governments and private enterprise. Some see it as a hedge against traditional financial markets. Why do you think Bitcoin might be valuable? Maybe you have a total different take on it, I guess. Maybe you think it's worthless. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. So where can I buy Bitcoin? So now that you understand what all the hype is about, maybe you would like to buy some Bitcoin at last. I guess we mentioned before there is now an enormous industry built around buying and selling Bitcoin. This means that you can purchase it almost any way that you like. Online, in a store, from an ATM, with a credit card, with a debit card, even with cash itself. The list goes on. The easiest way to get started though and learn about the full range of options available is head on over to Finder. We've got a guide for you here and we can obviously take you through that. There we have hundreds of guides on Bitcoin, cryptocurrency and blockchain. Now our guides on buying Bitcoin are perhaps the most comprehensive on the internet, with dozens of guides that let you compare cryptocurrency exchanges where you can exchange money, fiat money for cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and the steps. We can take you through that, and most importantly help you get the best deal for comparing over 70 different exchanges in terms of the prices and fees. You can find our guides as well as other helpful links in the description of this video right below. If video is your preferred format, then we also have a range of videos that show you how to buy your first cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin, Ethereum and XRP or Ripple with a range of exchanges. In those, we show you how to compare exchanges and sign up safely and securely by walking you through each step of the way. If all that sounds like too much, then check out our exchange guide, which suggests several exchanges depending on your needs, such as the best for beginners and most secure. And of course, if you found this video helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more content about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and blockchain. And don't forget, tell us why you think Bitcoin is or isn't valuable in the comments below. All right, that's Bitcoin, guys. We'll see you guys later. Yeah.